Welcome to the Global News Podcast from the BBC, where we go behind the headlines to delve deeper into a story. I'm Valerie Sanderson. We've had social media now for something like 20 years, and some of us, including many children, use it every single day. But with lawsuits being filed and government restrictions coming into force, are attitudes changing? Is the tide turning against social media? Well, I'm joined by our technology editor, Zoe Kleiman. And Zoe, it's true to say, isn't it, that there are many more cases being filed against social media companies?
I think there's two things going on here. The first is that there is a long process, legal process, for these cases to get to where they've got. So this has not happened quickly. These cases have been going through the motions for quite a long time. I also think it's something that we are talking a lot more about. People are much more aware of, and they feel very strongly about. And that is partly, I suppose, cumulative, isn't it? Over the last 20 years, we now have a real perspective of the impact that social media has had on society and particularly on young people. And it's making a lot more people feel a lot more strongly that, perhaps we should have handled this differently.
Is it fair to say, do you think that these young people are guinea pigs?
I think that there has been, to an extent, an experiment carried out here because nobody knew that social media would do what it did and that people would use it in the way that they did. I remember Mark Zuckerberg, the boss of Meta, formerly Facebook, when he was first challenged with the fact that his social platform was being used to manipulate elections. And he looked absolutely horror struck and he sort of denied it and said, of course not. Of course, that's not happening. He just couldn't believe that that was the case. But it was the case. It is the case. That is exactly what was going on. And so I think it's been quite a dramatic learning curve for both the tech companies and us as users in terms of, exactly how much impact it's had. And I think nobody really foresaw it being or becoming as powerful and as toxic as it did. If you think about how Facebook started, it was basically a way of meeting girls in university, wasn't it? It was never meant to become this thing that half the planet uses.
But I suppose the argument is that the apps aim to maximise the time that people spend scrolling, and that leads to addictive behaviour.
So there's a really interesting argument, I think, around the use of the word addiction. And it's at the heart of these cases that are going on in the US right now, because the social media companies say you have to be able to prove legally that our platform was the only thing that drove mental health crises. And as we know, that's a very difficult thing to say because often mental health issues are caused by a number of reasons. They might be exacerbated by one particular thing, but there's often lots of things going on. And I think the same with the word addiction. It's how do you prove that you're addicted to social media in a clinical sense? What does that actually look like? What does that mean? You are right that these platforms have been designed to be attractive because they're funded by advertising. And essentially, the longer you spend on that site, the longer your eyeballs are there, the more ads you're likely to see and the more money the platform can make. And that's how you get to use it for free. And you're right that they are designed. I heard a statistic the other day that the algorithm that powers TikTok is updated for every 8 videos you watch to make sure it's absolutely tuned in to exactly what it is that you're looking at so that it can serve you up more of it or more things like it and try to keep you there. But addiction is something else, isn't it? It's a clinical definition. And are people clinically addicted to social media? Well, that's one of the things that are on trial here.
I suppose families say, as far as their children go, the onus is on them to ensure that there's a safe experience online, and the social media companies aren't doing enough to make sure it is safe, particularly for those under 16.
I think there has been a real sense of handing over that responsibility to parents. We've seen the social networks come out with an enormous amount of tools for parents, right, designed to help parents monitor what their children have access to, who can message them, how long they can see things for, all of that kind of thing. And interestingly, Sir Nick Clegg, who has now left Meta but used to work there, said they had all these tools, but parents weren't using them. Their uptake was quite low. And what the feedback was that actually this is quite overwhelming. You're talking about dozens of tools. Your child is on multiple social networks. How are you supposed to manage this, or why is it all your job? I think you are right that there has been very much an attempt to push this onto parents as something for individual families to manage. The argument being, I suppose, that all children are different and different rules will apply to different personalities, and some children will have problems in different areas than others. And yet, if you look at the rules of the Online Safety Act here in the UK, the responsibility for keeping children safe online is very much not with the parents. Legally, in the UK, it lies with the companies.
And big tech, I mean, they do argue that there are good things about social media, don't they? That it fosters creativity, that it helps community.
Do you know what? I've been doing this job for a long time, and I have spoken to so many people about social media, and I've heard some utterly heartbreaking, awful stories that I will never forget. And they are totally tragic. And every tragedy is one too many. But I have also heard from lots of people who've had amazing experiences. They've formed communities around the world that they would never have met. They've found partners, they've found relationships, they've found lost family members, they've started businesses. And, as with so much of this technology, it's not a black and white, this is good, this is bad. I think it's all very nuanced, and each person will have a different experience. You and I can go to the same social network at the same time, and we will see something totally different because it will be, set up in different ways for us. So I think it is a very complex and nuanced debate about, is social media 100% uniformly bad? It's hard to argue either way, isn't it?
Is it your sense, though, the cultural tide is turning against social media?
I think what is interesting is that just as all of this is starting to come into the fore, we're also seeing a trend where younger people in particular are moving away from social media. They're moving much more into smaller, more personal sort of chat groups. And these networks are kind of aging. Facebook is still the grande dame. It's still used by billions of people. It is by far the biggest network in the world, but it's aging up. It's used by their parents and even their grandparents, but it's not necessarily used by them. And I think we're going to see potentially signs that all of these platforms are starting to age because younger people are not necessarily seeking them out. They're more connected now. They don't need to find those connections in the same way that perhaps the previous generation did, because they've already got them.
Is there a sense, though, do you think that the past 20 years it's been a bit like the Wild West and there haven't been enough rules?
I have heard this called the Wild West so many times.
Sorry
and
about
I've
the
heard
cliche.
so many times that the Wild West is over now. And guess what? I don't think it is. I think we are still slightly in the Wild West, and something changes and another issue pops up because, of course, it's dynamic and it's, it is very much dependent on the use of millions of people around the world. It's what everybody's doing with it, isn't it? That is causing the issues that it does. Certainly, there is much more scrutiny. There is much more regulation coming down the line. There is much more pressure from society for these companies to get it right and to become more responsible for their products and the way in which people are using them. It is interesting, isn't it, that they're protected in the US by Section 230, which does not define them as publishers, whereas every other broadcaster or publisher is responsible for what's on its platform. They're not. And you could argue that that's kind of out of date, isn't it? That these are very much publishing content on their platforms, and why shouldn't there be a bit more responsibility from them for that?
I think, Zoe, it's true to say that the real concern is about children. So do you think this idea of a ban on children under 16, something that Australia's brought in, that other countries like the UK, France and Spain are looking at, that really is the future?
I think it's certainly a very popular option at the moment. And I think it's probably quite likely to travel because there's a lot of sense that that's what people want. I also think, though, that there is a question. Some people say, are we preparing children for the world around them if we ban them from the tools that they are seeing all the adults using and that they are likely to be using themselves? You could argue that there is much more need for digital literacy, for better understanding, a better education about how to use these tools responsibly than just sort of hiding them away. On the other hand, there has been a lot of time and a lot of opportunities for these companies to make their platforms safer for children. They, of course, say that they have, but we still keep hearing these awful stories of things going very wrong and children coming to harm. Maybe it is the moment to say, well, we've given you every chance to try to fix this. You haven't been able to. So now, this is going to be a job for regulators.
Thanks, Zoe. That was our technology editor, Zoe Kleinman. And if you particularly like this episode, please subscribe to us here on YouTube. And if there's another story you want us to look into, please tell us in the comments below. More international news on our Global News podcast. Find it wherever you get your podcasts. But that's it from this edition of the Global News podcast here on YouTube. Thanks for listening and thanks for watching. Till next time, bye-bye.